So I think the biggest problem when it comes to creating content is this idea of burnout. I went through it. Everybody that is growing a personal brand or a brand in general is going through it. And I wanted to make this video to hopefully give you a framework and most importantly, a complete, like a total mindset shift that will finally allow you to grow, hopefully, a cold brands, as I mentioned here, without the social media burnout. Because I think right now, from what I'm seeing, and again, I went through it in 2024, where as content creators, we're almost like on this hamster wheel, trying to constantly perform, trying to like constantly keep up with the trends. And what that does, it obviously, puts us in this like constant mode of having to be there 24/7. And obviously, we're human beings. So if you're in that situation right now where, especially with your personal brand, you don't feel like you're yourself, you feel like you lose yourself in this whole, content. Like, I got to figure out a strategy. I got to constantly film. I got to constantly, like, you know, almost like quote unquote perform. It's probably because you cannot like be yourself. Like, you have that like underlying feeling that, you have to like dumb yourself down to like find a niche to fit in to whatever. And again, that leads to burnout. And I'm talking from personal experience here, from talking to hundreds, if not thousands, of creators, working with people one on one. This is the number one thing that I'm seeing. The minute you essentially apply what we're going to talk about in the video, and we're going to start in a bit, the minute you apply this, your whole entire like mindset and perspective and perception of content and creating content changes. Because there is a way, especially if you're growing your personal brand in 2026, there is a way to create without this idea of, without looking at content like it's a job, like a 24/7 job. So we're going to get into it. And honestly, this video was like really, really close to my heart because I went through it again in like 2024. I remember at the beginning of the year, I was so obsessed with this idea of like fitting in and niching down. And everybody tells you, you got to niche down. And I did, but I noticed that kind of like took away, my spirit and like my soul. And at the time, I wasn't doing content like this. And I went through such a rough burnout. Like, I took 2 months off, haven't filmed a single video, didn't film a single video in that like period. And that's what it was. Like, I got to that point where my content didn't feel like me, right? And I felt constricted. I felt like really limited by all of this, like the entire noise that you hear in this fucking content space. Like, niche down, find your angle, whatever. So we're gonna like unpack everything. So this is how to build a cold brand without the social media burnout. So let's get into it. I want to touch on this. Why content feels essentially heavy, and it's again almost like this like burden that you carry. It's because I think most people approach social media like a performance, right? So and I went through this. So what should I post? What's trending? What niche should I be in? What's the perfect niche? What's the perfect angle? Like, what do people want to hear? And then the thing with that is every piece of content becomes a calculation, right? So that's obviously exhausting because you're not creating from a standpoint of, actually wanting to be yourself, express yourself almost like an artist. You're constantly on this like hamster wheel. And this is what I'm seeing. Being consistent when you're in this mode is extremely hard and taxing, not only on the mind, not only on the body, but I believe on the soul. Because how can you be truly consistent if the content that you're producing doesn't feel like you? It's very hard, right? So it's also this idea of like trying to fit in, which I call the fitting in trap. Because we're told to, again, find our niche. I'm so like sick of this like idea. You got to find your niche. Study, what's working, like model after successful creators. So what ends up happening is you look at like what's popping and you try to fit your niche, your ideas into like formats that work for someone else. And you feel like you got to dumb yourself down and then your content ends up looking like everyone else's because it is everyone else's. That's what I want to highlight. When you try to fit in, you essentially end up creating the content that everybody else is creating. And so that obviously doesn't feel like you, right? It just has like your face on it. And the thing is with this, no wonder it doesn't resonate, right? And no wonder you're burnt out. I had this conversation literally like last night with a creator on Instagram, and she was saying, I have so much to give, but I feel so limited by the fact, this idea that I have to niche down and I have to only talk about one topic. And I literally sent her a voice memo, like a voice message on Instagram, and told her, what if you didn't have to do that? What if you could literally be yourself? And essentially, I broke down in like 4 minutes, I broke down everything that we're gonna cover in this video. And that's the answer. Like, you don't have to try to fit in. Because also with this, and this is like the biggest, probably the biggest mindset shift, is like, you need to treat content like a diary. And we're gonna break this down further. But what I see is, again, most people treat content like this chore, like I have to post, I have to do this, I have to write another script, I have to, post another story, I have to do this. But um, you do this to the point it becomes a fucking job. Again, like content, especially if you're literally doing this out of your pure desire to express yourself and help others, regardless of the industry that you operate in. You don't like this doesn't need to feel like a job. Now, obviously, there are some aspects in it which you have to treat like a business and stuff, but the minute it feels like a chore, like, oh my God, I have to do this. And again, I used to be in that. I used to be in that for like so long. And that's what happens when you feel like you have to take everything that you embody and everything that you know and like literally limit yourself and dumb yourself down just to try and like fit in a space. But the big thing with this is, what if you treat social media like a diary, right? So every post is an expression, something you actually want to share, a thought you need to get out. What if you make this change? And this is what we're going to cover in the video. But first, let's talk about this idea of the cold brand approach. And we have some really interesting case studies here that I think will give you a lot of clarity, because cold brands don't actually try to appeal to everyone. They don't chase trends. So when we're talking about this idea of like building your cold brand, this is what it's about. It's not about, um, manipulating people and like psyoping people to like buy your stuff. No, it's actually about building something that people relate to on a deep human level. And most importantly, something that a brand that feels like you, right? That feels like it's second nature. Content just flows, ideas flow, you don't have to force stuff. And again, the relatability aspect is huge here. And we're gonna cover the collective consciousness in a bit and talk about that. But the thing with cold brands is they don't optimize for the algorithm. They just express a point of view so specific, so authentic, that the right people become obsessed. So if you're in that mind state right now of like, I have to appeal to as many people as possible, no, you don't have to do that. You got to like completely change that. Walk away from this idea of I have to fit in and everybody has to like me. No. Like when we're talking about a cold brand, this is the whole point. You want the right people to become obsessed, and the wrong people, you gotta let them go. And that's totally fine. And cold brands, obviously, they create their own lane and just people follow them into it. So it's not this idea of like finding a niche. Now, what I want to cover here, the first case study is from Yves Saint Laurent, right? He's someone, his story and like the brands, someone that I really admire, and we're gonna cover basically what he did. So Yves Saint Laurent didn't try to fit into fashion. That's the thing. He completely broke it. He completely broke this concept of like trying to fit in and do the things that every other single like fashion brand was doing. So what did he do? He put women in tuxedos when that was just something scandalous. Like that was something, why would a woman like wear a tuxedo? And again, you will notice this pattern of like, as a cold brand, you have to actively go against the wave in the market, go against the industry. Now, he made ready to wear fashion when, haute couture was basically the only like real fashion. So he just challenged the status quo. And he drew from street culture when fashion was supposed to be elite, right? Now, notice this, he didn't ask what the market wanted. He didn't try to find his niche, whatever. He expressed what he believed. That's the biggest thing. So what was the result of this? The result was he didn't just build a brand, right? He built a movement. And that's the best place to be in. I mentioned this before. I'm actually working with one of the biggest fashion brands across the US, and we're doing the same exact thing, right? And I told the founder, like, we had this conversation, and it's like, on a long-term like vision, we want to build a movement for this. Like, we don't want to, we don't want to just build another brand. We want to build a movement, something that people relate to, something that literally builds this like idea of a loyal army. This is what we want to build. Now, women, started wearing like more, essentially like tuxedos and YSL, and they weren't just like wearing clothes, right? They were making a statement about who they were. That's huge. And what was the lesson in this? Well, simple. Like Saint Laurent wasn't trying to fit in, right? He was expressing something he genuinely believed in. And that authenticity is what created the actual cult, right? Now, the next one in here is still fashion, and pretty much like all of the case studies today are going to be fashion, but Tom Ford, right? So Tom Ford, he made essentially like fashion sexual, provocative, like dangerous, while everybody else in the industry was playing it safe. He leaned into desire, power, and edge, right? And he didn't ask customers like, about what they wanted. He expressed his own aesthetic relentlessly, right? Same pattern as with Saint Laurent, like same thing. He didn't ask, he didn't step into the space asking like, what is the perfect niche to take with this? What do you guys want? Right? What do you guys want? And that's the thing is content creators, I feel like we're stuck in this mode of like constantly thinking, what will people say? There are a lot of people, even you watching, like this video might not be for you. And that's perfectly fine. Because my job is to appeal to the right people that understand these things. Every single client of mine that I'm working with, that's why they start working with me. First of all, like for who I am, my mindset, my entire energy, the things that I believe in, the things that I stand against, right? And then the concepts, the psychology, everything. So again, it's not supposed to be this idea of like you got to step into the market and literally like start asking people, what do you guys want? Because then you're performing for them rather than expressing yourself, if that makes sense. Now, what was the result in this? Well, Gucci went from, nearly dead to one of the most desired like brands in the world, not because he gave people what they asked for, but because he gave them what he believed in. And the lesson again is Tom Ford didn't burn out because he wasn't performing. He was literally like channeling something real, his own taste, his own vision, his own point of view, right? That's the whole thing. Another case study in here, we got Virgil Abloh. The guy was amazing. So he built Off-White and literally transformed Louis Vuitton by being unapologetically himself. Now, what he did was really smart. So he brought the streetwear sort of like angle to the high fashion, right? When the industry thought that was just beneath them, he used quotation marks and irony, and he referenced his own journey as a Black creative in spaces that didn't always welcome him, right? So he posted his process, his references, his inspirations, not polished campaigns. He wasn't going with this whole like highly polished, like high-end fashion thing. And the result of this, he became one of the most influential designers of a generation, not by, again, fitting in, but by being so authentically himself that others wanted to follow. And they did, right? And then others obviously try to copy him and stuff like that. So it's the same exact pattern that you see with everyone that we took a look at. So they actively went against that industry, against the fashion industry. They actively went against it. They didn't conform. And that's what you have to understand as a content creator. If you genuinely want to leave a mark, if you want to make a difference, if you want to attract the right people for you, regardless of, again, you could be in the fitness space and the mindset, whatever, it doesn't matter. You have to be willing to, first of all, take some like hate, get some hate, because hate just comes with the dinner. And then two, you have to be willing to create your own space, your own universe, your own sort of bubble. I talk about it constantly. Like, look at the space you're in, figure out what is the typical, let's say, fashion. What is the typical thing that people do on Instagram, people do on YouTube, whatever, TikTok? What are the typical content formats? And then you literally go against that. Now, let's cover the diary way in here of like approaching content, because again, I would ask you right now, what if you just treated social media and content like your diary instead of, your job? So not with this idea of like, what should I post today? But, what's on my mind? What am I genuinely passionate about? What am I thinking? What am I thinking about? What am I learning? What do I believe in? What am I actually going through? Because when you make this shift, I guarantee you, and I'm seeing this literally with my clients, like most coaches and strategists and stuff tell you, they give you scripts, whatever, and that's why it feels so heavy, because the content doesn't feel like you. So you end up burning out. You end up like, it's literally the worst place to be in, because you treat this literally like a job. But when you make this sort of like shift and you understand, okay, I can just like leverage the things that I'm passionate about, the things that I'm learning. For example, I was reading about like Saint Laurent, right? And I had this idea for the video combined with a lot of like bunch of other ideas in my head. That's how this video came about. And I don't treat content right now like, what's the best thing to fucking post so it can take off? Fuck that. I'm not treating content like that. And I still, like I said it before, I think I'm still at like 5%, 10% of like all of the things that I'm actively thinking about. And I want to do a lot of videos which are like just me yapping for like 40 minutes just for the sake of it. I used to do that like before, but I love these videos, right? Now, are these videos the most like popular videos in the entire world? Probably not, but I don't care, because I genuinely, like, I had this 5 days ago, whatever, like I was watching one of the videos that I put out, like front to back, and I literally like call myself like staring at the screen, like, oh my god, this is like really interesting. And so that's a good sign. So again, treat this like a diary, because the old way of like doing content and the typical way is essentially, research trending topics, you find a hook that worked for someone else, the whole thing. Like you script something, you optimize for engagement, you post, and then you stress about the performance. But with diary, the diary way, it's super simple. Like something happened in your life, you went through something, you learned something, right? Then you believe in something, then you say, okay, I'm going through this, I'm going through something. One is performance, so the old way, right? While the other way, like the diary way, is literally like expression, because one drains you, and again, the other actually fills you and makes you want to post. Because the minute you understand, you can, like, I can grab my phone and I can literally talk to the camera and just express myself and say literally anything that I believe in. Now, obviously, there is structure to this, but the minute you are able to do that, then you become free. And then, ironically, I guess not, but to a degree, that's when you become like really magnetic. That's when content starts to take off, because people can feel it. People can feel when you're not, when you don't have that conviction, when you're creating content, when you're not like yourself, when you're just saying whatever you believe in, the right people again will gravitate, right, towards you. So let's cover the collective consciousness in here, because this is an interesting topic. I talked about it before. The thing is, when content resonates deeply, you have to understand it's because you essentially touched something that already exists in people. So this is, we're talking about a feeling they have but cannot really articulate, a thought they've had but never voiced, never said out loud, right? And the thing is, you cannot do this by copying trends. You cannot do that by, finding a strategy, being strategic. This only works when you're essentially yourself and you understand what I mean by collective consciousness is like looking at the space that you're in, the things that people struggle with, the things that they genuinely want but cannot really like express. When you understand that and you pair that with you being yourself, that's when you really win. And that's when you get that reaction, like, like literally what you said in this video changed my life. It feels like you're literally like in my head. That's the best place to be in. And again, you can only do that, as I mentioned, by being honest about what you actually think and feel. Because when you express something real, you tap into something universal. Like your specific experience connects to their specific experience. And that is resonance. That's how content resonates. Like if you look at creators that literally, they say whatever they want to say, and content like completely like pops off and it resonates and they get messages and whatever, that's what happens. They tap into collective consciousness. That is what's happening, right? So the more specific, that's the irony with this. The more specific and personal you are, the more universal you become. But when you try to like appeal to everyone, you essentially appeal to no one, because people can tell, you're trying to like be, liked by everyone. And this puts you in a not so like high leverage position. And you end up creating content that's generic, right? Like forgettable. And when you express like your actual thoughts, fears, beliefs, experiences, like people feel it because they have the same thoughts, fears, beliefs, and also like life experiences. Like that's the thing. When I talked about it before, literally, like if you and I get on a call, I'm gonna share a lot about like my personal stuff, my personal life, my personal journey with this. Even in the videos, I'm doing this. Why? Because I understand the more I do this, the more, one, you will get to know me, but two, the more the right people will resonate. And then they will want to work with me. Now, will every single person that watches my content or your content want to work with you? Like, no. But it's not about that. It's about capturing the right people, right? Because at one point, like your diary can literally, like the content can become like their mirror. And again, that's the best place to be in. I literally have moments on my Instagram when I go and like I post these story rants, and I'm really like raw and honest, and I talk about my journey. Like I'm talking about like a lot of dark moments, a lot of like rock bottom moments, whatever, and the things that I learned from it. And I express that literally like without any kind of guardrails, or without thinking what are people going to say. And whenever I'm doing that, I'm noticing like the amount of likes, but like also like replies and conversations I initiate from that, just because I'm a real fucking human being and I'm expressing the things that I'm going through. That like that's the best. So with this, I want to tell you, stop trying to fit in, right? Because everybody tells you to find your niche. You have to be specific about who you serve. And the thing with that is like, it's not wrong, right? The approach is just a bit like wrong. But because, most people interpret this as like, you have to find a category that already exists and like squeeze yourself into it. So I have to find this bubble that already exists, and I have to try and like force my way in that bubble. So you become another like mindset coach, you become another branding expert, another fitness creator, another finance bro. You fit in. That's why on Instagram, if you check my Instagram, um I don't have like in the username, I don't have branding coach or marketing coach or whatever, business mentor, business coach. I don't have that. I just have literally my name, Andre. I just have that because I believe I transcend this space of like just talking about, let's say, branding, or just talking about like funnels. Just, I don't even talk about that. Like I talk about a lot of things, the psychology, the whatever. I might do a case study on, Tom Ford, just because that's something that I'm passionate about in terms of like breaking down the frameworks in psychology. So that's how you got to look at it. Stop trying to fit in. And with this, create your own bubble, create your own lane, whatever you want to call it, because that's the alternative, right? So instead of finding a niche, create a lane. Ask yourself, what do I actually care about? What do you actually know? And what have you actually lived? Because this right here, these things, this is your leverage in the market. Whether you're a 25-year-old starting content for the first time, or a 60-year-old that worked in like finance, whatever, and is now creating content, these things are like your leverage. And the intersection, and we're going to cover this, of your passions, your skills, and your experience creates something that no one else can replicate, right? Because no one else has your exact combination. This is what you have to understand. Your biggest leverage is the intersection of this. And this is what I call the intersection framework. So it sounds fancy, but it's really not. Like, you got to figure out what are my obsessions, right? So what topics can you talk about like for hours? What do you consume endlessly? What are your skills? So what are you actually good at, right? And what is your story? So what have you lived through? Like what transformation have you experienced? Like what pain have you turned into wisdom? I literally talk about it before, but I have this tattoo, the only tattoo that I have, that literally reads from my side pain, and then from the opposite side it reads love. And that's my life thesis. Also with content, take the negative stuff that you went through and convert it into something positive. So when you find, right, the intersection between these things, like that's your unique angle in the market. Again, regardless of the industry doesn't really matter, the product doesn't really matter, offer doesn't really matter. You have to genuinely, you can be a founder of like a big brand. If you're creating content yourself, putting your cell phone camera, take a look at this, the intersection. Now, I want to share some principles with you, and we're going to end with this in terms of like building a brand without the burnout, because this is huge. Once you have your lane and you're, treating content like a diary, you then need obviously a system that doesn't drain you, that doesn't like make this feel like a fucking job, because that's the last thing you want. So first, you want to capture, not create, right? So what do I mean by this? Stop sitting down to quote unquote like create content. Like, oh my God, I gotta film. Like looking at it like a chore, essentially. And start capturing what's already happening in your mind, right? So when you have a thought, write it down. When you learn something, take a note. Like when you have a conversation that sparks something, like record a voice memo. It's literally like sometimes what I'm doing is I'm recording like a voice memo of some concept, some idea, and then I might turn that into an actual video, right? So content creation then becomes literally curation of your own thoughts. It becomes this like fun thing. Like, I'm thinking about all of these things. Let me just go through them and then convert them into content formats. So again, it's the diary rather than having to create. The second principle in here is like depth over frequency, because this is something that I learned. The burnout, right? It comes from trying to like post constantly, like every single day, trying to post like 30 videos. That's not sustainable, especially if you're in the early stages and you're kind of like by yourself, you don't have a team. So, daily content, like multiple platforms, always turned on. But cold brands and brands that are like genuinely, operating from this idea of like, I have to build something sustainable, don't work like that. Hermes, for example, obviously we're talking, there are levels to the levels. They don't post daily. Ferrari doesn't chase the algorithm. Like what they do is they go deep, right? Like not wide. Because one piece of content that expresses something real beats 10 pieces of like filler content. Because the thing is, quality creates obsession. And the quantity, like just blind amounts of like volume and stuff without any substance, that obviously just creates like more noise in the market, and we don't need that, right? Third principle in here is like energy management. So you want to create from overflow, not from obligation. This is something that I've experienced because I have a really tough time to just chill, and I feel almost like I used to, at least. I used to feel like super guilty, like taking a day off. But realistically, if you want to go the long run, you want to create not from obligation. You don't want to create from this idea of like I have to do this. You want to create when you're filled with that energy, when you're really high energy. So don't create when you're empty, right? Create when you're full. That's the super simple. Because when something excites you, that's when you have to create. When you have the energy, that's when you record. Because forcing content when you're literally like drained just produces like drained content, and the thing is people can actually feel it. So I would much rather you building a structure around this and a routine in which you wait for the overflow and then you capture it as much as possible. You might have a burst of energy one day, record for 2 hours. That's better than you trying to like constantly record. That's why I went through the burnout that I went through last year, rather than in 2024. That's why I went through it, because it was this idea of like constantly being on the hamster wheel, and it's not sustainable. Like I'm speaking from personal experience. So principle number 4 in here is like owning your like platform, because obviously social media, should feed something you own. So this could be a newsletter, right? A YouTube channel, a community. Because if all of your energy goes into just rented platforms, especially with short form, if everything that you're doing is like just making some short videos, you're building on sand. And you got to create evergreen assets with your brand. Long form content, literally what I'm doing here, is one of the best things that you can do, no matter like what the industry you operate in, because these long form videos, they compound, right? So it's the compound effect. Things that work for you like while you rest, essentially. And that's how you build without burning out with this. And that's how you build something sustainable. The final thing that I want to touch on here is you got to give yourself the permission to be yourself, right? You do not need to find a niche that already exists. You can create your own lane. Obviously, you can leverage things that are working. You can look at trends. You can look at patterns. You can look at the psychology. You can look at things that people are struggling with, your competition, quote unquote, right? But create your own lane. Like, don't create your own world. You don't need to post daily like a maniac. You don't need to be on the hamster wheel 24/7. There is a way to build this system. And, I literally had this conversation today with one of my friends. Consistency means showing up daily, but today, let's say you might show up at 60%. Tomorrow, you show up at like 80%. The day after, you might show up at 0%, and that's fine. The minute you're trying to force yourself or have that almost like expectation that every single day needs to be 1000%, like that's not sustainable and that's not realistic. So you have to focus, instead of like, again, the perfection thing, focus on treating this like your diary, focus on treating this like something you actually enjoy, and find a way to remove all of the fucking limitations. This idea, I gotta find my niche, I gotta find what is the best thing to say. Find a way to, you know, peel back the layers, essentially, and become yourself. Because when you do, again, content feels second nature. You're literally gonna get so much more fulfillment out of it, and it's gonna feel fun, right? Because in my case, for example, I literally found my niche by not niching down, which is like a very like weird concept. But again, I was trying to find my niche, and I ended up sounding like everybody else in the space, because that's what everybody tells you. If you're a business coach, if you're operating in the space, you have to find your niche. You have to only focus on people that do X, people that do this. Like, it doesn't matter. I literally found my people and the clients that I'm working with, which are, I mention this all the time. I have somebody in fashion, I have somebody in mindset, somebody in fitness, somebody in fashion, another person in fashion, actually. She's a fashion stylist. Somebody in real estate, somebody in software, somebody in private equity. Why do you think I can work with these people? It's not, because I found, a niche, like, for example, only fitness coaches or whatever. These are actual people and actual founders and actual brands. And the common denominator is they want to build a brand around who they are. And that's why they start working with me. So obviously, if you're somebody like that, you can contact me. You have the link down below. But the thing is with this, again, you don't need to be strategic about every single piece of content. You can just express what you actually think, and you don't need to fit in, right? Because fitting in, this idea of like constantly trying to, fit in, is why you're burnt out. So hopefully this video gave you the clarity in terms of approaching this as a means to an end, in terms of as a means to genuinely express yourself, and almost like treat this like an art, right? The artists, especially the rebel artists are typically like rebels. They don't care, right? They don't care about the market. They don't care about what people say. They just create out of the needs and the desire to express themselves. So again, give yourself, I want to highlight this again, give yourself permission to be yourself If you're kind of like struggling in terms of like getting the clarity with that, you can book a pay consultation call with me down below, and I can help you essentially build that foundation. And then more than that, I can literally help you change your life with your brand. And I'm serious about it because I'm seeing this in like real time. And it's beautiful when people truly show up as who they are, right? So I'll see you in the next video.